Adrenal insufficiency essentially means living without a built-in thermostat for physical stress, and the process of manually adjusting your medication to compensate, known as stress dosing, is perhaps the most critical skill a patient can master to prevent an adrenal crisis. According to clinical guidelines from the Endocrine Society, the goal of stress dosing is to mimic the natural surge of cortisol that a healthy body produces during illness or injury, but finding the balance between being undercovered and over-medicated is a constant challenge. It's not just about taking more pills, it's about understanding the physiological difference between a bad day and a physical emergency.
That balance is so delicate because cortisol affects almost every system in the body, from blood pressure and blood sugar to how your immune system responds to a virus. When we talk about stress dosing, we're talking about doubling or tripling the daily replacement dose of hydrocortisone, or its equivalent. For someone with primary adrenal insufficiency, where the adrenal glands themselves are damaged, or secondary adrenal insufficiency, where the pituitary isn't sending the right signals, the body simply cannot ramp up production on demand. If you don't step in manually during a high-stress event, your blood pressure can drop dangerously, leading to a crisis. But as researchers often point out in longitudinal studies, chronic over-replacement leads to iatrogenic Cushing syndrome, which carries risks like bone density loss, weight gain, and high blood sugar. So the first question is always, when is it actually necessary?
The clearer indications are usually physical. A fever of 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit is a standard red line where most specialists recommend doubling the dose. Major infections like the flu, pneumonia, or a UTI are obvious triggers. Then you have the mechanical stresses like a bone fracture, a significant burn, or undergoing surgery. For major procedures, the protocol usually shifts from oral tablets to intravenous hydrocortisone, often starting with a 100 milligram bolus at induction, followed by consistent doses every few hours. The idea is to keep the body saturated while the trauma of surgery is at its peak.
And it's important to differentiate between those clear-cut physical traumas and the gray zones that cause a lot of confusion. Take exercise, for example. A routine session at the gym or a morning jog usually doesn't require extra steroids. A healthy person's cortisol rise for moderate exercise is actually quite modest. However, if you're running a marathon or spending 8 hours moving heavy furniture in the summer heat, that shifts into the territory of unusual exertion where a small pre-dose might be justified. Heat is another tricky one, especially for those with primary adrenal insufficiency. Since they often lose aldosterone, the hormone that manages salt, extreme sweating is often more about salt and hydration than it is about needing more hydrocortisone. You might need an electrolyte drink more than you need an extra pill.
I think the hardest part for many people is distinguishing between feeling off and a physiological need for more cortisol. If someone has a headache or they're just in a bad mood, is it dangerous to reach for that extra dose? Clinical consensus suggests that reflexively popping hydrocortisone for ordinary fatigue or a stressful email can actually be counterproductive. It erodes the therapeutic window and can mask other health issues your body is trying to signal. If we treat every emotional hurdle with a stress dose, we aren't just risking side effects, we're losing the ability to tell when we are actually in trouble.
That leads directly into some of the most common misunderstandings patients encounter. One of the biggest is the idea that I feel bad, therefore I need more steroids. Feeling poorly is a symptom, not a trigger. You have to look for the objective driver. Is there a fever? Did you just get hit by a car? Are you vomiting? If the answer is no, and you're just having a low-energy day, taking extra steroids won't necessarily fix the root cause, and over time contributes to that Cushingoid state we mentioned. Another big misconception is that every illness requires the exact same stress dose. A mild sniffle with no fever might require 0 extra medication, while a full-blown case of sepsis requires immediate hospitalization and IV support. You have to match the dose to the severity of the physiological insult.
There's also this fear around missing a single dose. People sometimes think if they forget their 10 a.m. tablet, they're heading straight for a crisis. In reality, a crisis usually stems from a prolonged absence of the hormone, or from being unable to keep meds down due to vomiting, or having a massive infection while on a standard dose. A single forgotten pill is usually resolved by just taking it as soon as you remember. And we have to address the more is safer myth. It's tempting to think that taking extra just in case is a harmless insurance policy, but the medical literature is clear. Sustained excess hydrocortisone thins the skin, suppresses the immune system, and weakens the skeleton. The safety margin is narrow at both ends of the spectrum.
We should also clarify the terminology because people use updosing and stress dosing interchangeably, but they aren't the same. Think of updosing as a small, tactical bump, maybe an extra 5 milligrams because you're traveling across time zones or facing a very long, physically demanding day. Stress dosing is the big guns, doubling or tripling for a confirmed illness or injury. And then there's the emergency injection, which is a different tier entirely, reserved for when you can't use the oral route at all. Also, don't forget the taper. If you've been tripling your dose for a 3-day flu, you shouldn't just drop back to your baseline the second your fever breaks. Your body might still be dealing with lingering inflammation, so a step down over 24 to 72 hours is generally much safer to avoid a crash.
Let's look at some real-life scenarios to make this concrete. Vomiting and diarrhea are probably the most dangerous situations because they take the manual control out of your hands. If you vomit within an hour of taking your dose, the standard advice is to redose immediately. But if the vomiting continues, oral meds are no longer an option. That is when you use the emergency intramuscular injection and get to the emergency room. You can't wait it out and hope the next dose stays down. The same goes for severe diarrhea. Even if you aren't vomiting, the medication might not be absorbing properly through the gut, which can lead to a sneaky decline in your levels.
And what about dental work or procedures? That's a common point of anxiety. A simple cleaning or a local filling usually only needs a small pre-dose to handle the adrenaline from the local anesthetic. But something like a colonoscopy is much more complex. You have the fasting, the laxatives that cause dehydration, and the sedation itself. That requires a coordinated stress dosing plan for both the day of the prep and the day of the procedure. It's a stacking stressor event. Actually, stacking is a great concept to understand. A single stressor, like a bad night's sleep, might be fine, but a bad night's sleep plus a long-haul flight plus a minor cold. Together, those can add up to a physiological load that justifies a stress dose, even if no single one of them would on its own.
Emotional stress remains the grayest area. The death of a loved one or a car accident, events that cause a massive visceral physical reaction or even vomiting, certainly warrant extra coverage. But a tough day at the office or generalized anxiety usually shouldn't be handled with steroids. It's about looking for that systemic physical impact. If your heart is racing and you're shaking, your body is telling you it's under genuine physiological strain.
So, how does someone actually build a plan that works for them? It starts with recognizing your own patterns. Some people might cruise through a cold on a double dose, while others might find their blood pressure tanking. Keeping a log for a few months is invaluable. Document the trigger, your temperature, the symptoms, what dose you took, and how you felt 24 hours later. That data is much more useful to your endocrinologist than just saying, "I feel tired sometimes." It helps you find your specific thresholds.
Preparation is the next step. If you're traveling, you need a doctor's letter, extra supplies in your carry-on, and a clear plan for time zone shifts. But you also need to know the red flags that mean your plan isn't working. If you're confused, extremely weak, or your blood pressure is bottoming out despite a stress dose, that's not a take more pills situation. That is an emergency injection and call 911 situation. Every patient should have an emergency kit with Solu-Cortef and, crucially, should have practiced using a dummy syringe. Trying to learn how to give an injection while you're pre-syncopal in a bathroom stall is not the time to read the instructions for the first time.
And that plan needs to be accessible. A letter buried in a filing cabinet won't help you at 2 a.m. It should be on the fridge, a photo of it should be on your phone, and a copy should be in your wallet. It needs to include your baseline dose, clear instructions for doubling or tripling, and, this is vital, the exact phrase to use at the ER. I have adrenal insufficiency, I am in or at risk of crisis, and I need 100 milligrams of IV hydrocortisone immediately. Being that specific can save lives because not every ER doctor is intimately familiar with the nuances of adrenal insufficiency management.
It really comes down to creating a worksheet for yourself. List your baseline, your specific triggers for doubling, like a certain temperature, and your triggers for the IM injection. List your emergency contacts and keep a checklist of your supplies. The goal here isn't to live in fear of the next crisis, but to have a system that is so well rehearsed that you can act decisively without having to overthink it when you're feeling unwell. It gives you back a sense of control over a condition that can otherwise feel very unpredictable.
It's about moving from a reactive state to a proactive one. When you understand the why behind the stress dose, that you're essentially acting as your own pituitary and adrenal gland, the rules about fevers and injuries start to make more sense. You aren't just following a checklist, you're managing your body's internal chemistry in real time. But as we've discussed, this is complex stuff. Every body is different, and what works for one person might not be enough for another, which is why working closely with a specialist is the only way to tailor these general guidelines to your specific biology.
This whole framework, from identifying the right triggers to building a usable emergency plan, is designed to be a conversation starter between you and your endocrinologist. Adrenal insufficiency requires a high level of patient education because you are the one making the hour-by-hour decisions during an illness. While these guidelines represent the standard of care, your personal medical history, whether you have other conditions like diabetes or thyroid issues, will influence how your doctor wants you to manage your dosing. The more you know about the underlying science, the better partner you can be in your own care.
Mastering the stress dose is ultimately about safety and quality of life. By avoiding unnecessary doses, you protect your long-term health, and by taking the necessary ones promptly, you stay out of the hospital. It's a learning curve, and it takes time to get comfortable with the nuances, but having that parachute ready, both the knowledge and the emergency kit, is what allows you to live a full life despite the diagnosis.
Knowing how to advocate for yourself in a medical setting and having your personal protocol ready to go is the best way to ensure you get the right care when every minute counts. If you found these strategies for managing adrenal insufficiency helpful, share this conversation with someone else who is navigating a chronic condition.